the idea of this podcast is kind of like to reframe everything. As our God, we owe him absolute worship. As our King, we're citizens in his kingdom. He's our Father that instructs us in righteousness. He's our friend. As it says in Proverbs, there's a friend that sticks closer than a brother. There's major themes that start in Genesis. In the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. The earth is formless and void. Darkness is upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moves over the waters, and God says, let there be light. What type of creation story is this?
So you're opening somebody else's mail.
42 rule, right?
Yeah.
It's written for you, but not to you. If you're reading a comic, you don't put it the same weight. If you're reading like a legal document, you're getting sued about something, right? So you have to understand them in their own context. And so we have to understand the text as an ancient Israelite would understand the text. Otherwise, we're practicing anachronism. And on the seventh day, that's the climax of the story, right? It's not the 6 days of creation, it's the 7 days of creation, in which this deity is now going to take up his rulership. That's what the rest meant at that time, because he's ordered the cosmos habitable for beings that he wants to have a relationship. They don't have a physics view of the universe, right? They have a theological view. What is this Garden of Eden thing, right? So what it ends up being is like the nexus point, the place where heavens meet the earth, where Yahweh, the God of Israel, is governing both domains. This is what's going to emerge like the divine order, right? So, and if you want to be on Yahweh's team, then you might want to uphold the order that he originally put there, which is why today you're seeing this blending of all of the orders. You're either found underneath Adam unto death, or you're found underneath Jesus Christ unto life. If in the end times you believe that there's going to be this one world government, this one world religion, this one world currency, and it's all going to be kind of controlled by this character known as the Antichrist. Just how is this system built? Is like this guy's not going to just get dropped in, right? And everybody all of a sudden just pay homage to him for no real reason. And so to detail how that system is actually set up, what that system would look like, what are the details that you should look for from two different perspectives, from the biblical perspective and from like the secular perspective. So, and in that we've separated it based on, that's why we separated the podcast, so we can follow a clear New World Order concept, not just going back to Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes-Milner Group and the Rockefeller Consortium and all that.
Because that's surface level at this point, right?
It is, and I think people are gonna start getting tired of hearing that same thing over again. Oh, it's thesis, antithesis.
And the further back we go, the more it answers the question like who and why and what to do type of thing, right? Because usually when you're new to all this thing, everything kind of hits you, because you go from the level of, well, nobody would really do this, nobody is really that evil, and then you go like, okay, why would somebody do this? Why are people so evil, right?
And then the usual thing is it's about money, right? And so when you see that, no, money is money at this level becomes such a small piece, right? Because they would be the owners of money. They're just using money as a tool.
Exactly. What I like to say, they print money. Now what? Right? So if they literally can print your money, I mean, the whole American system was working. Not to get Cyvilan over here real quick, but imagine you print a paper and then you give it to another nation to get resources from them. That's the whole idea of like the petrodollar and all that stuff, right? That's a really good deal for America. I don't think that's such a good deal for anybody else.
For it to be the base currency.
Right? But
for a commodity that we won't control,
exactly.
Right? So, unless we buy warfare, go over there and buy, the corporatocracy, we put our corporations over there who suck the oil on the ground, right? So, and so that's on the secular thing. So even in the secular strain, you can go all the way back to like ancient Sumer, ancient Ugarit, through the kings of Egypt, because what you're going to follow is this what's known as the divine right of kings. And so there's usually some secret occult knowledge that's passed down by either an anointed or an initiated priesthood, and then they determine the next set of rulers that the populace gets to elect. And we mentioned before that you may have an elected official, but you've never selected one. So these ideas they go way back, and so which gives both podcasts the ability to kind of like traverse the timeline and not get stuck in any one era. And so kind of like with what we're doing here. So I guess the overarching theme for God, King, Father, Friend is to tell like the complete biblical story, kind of like from end to end, and see that there is like this psychological war. And in this psychological war, again, there's two separate threads, right? And so we want to detail the biblical narrative for that psychological war, and it kind of goes back to, the God of Israel being the Most High God, who then divides the nations at the Tower of Babel. And he places the sons of God over those nations, and then the sons of God, they become hostile, and they become what later is going to be known as the gods of the nations. And so that's going to frame your entire Old Testament as Yahweh and his people versus the fallen sons of God and their people. And so going forward on the timeline, these are all the precursors for how you're going to get, the nations of the world they're not going to stay separate. What are they going to do? They're going to come back together. And so now this is the whole idea of this, like you hear now unity and all that stuff. We have to get together. We have to do this and all that stuff. United Nations. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, again, I don't want to go back to COVID, but we started hearing that a lot more since COVID started. We're all in this together, right? Only together we can beat this and all that stuff, right? You get, there's a lot of togetherness. There's a lot of solidarity. There's a lot of like ecumenical movement stuff, and so the separation becomes kind of like this new common evil, right, where everybody has to come together and kind of to beat that, right? Yes. And so to do that, you got to create a common enemy, and the virus was the common enemy to bring everybody together. And so this is classic, not to be, the dead horse, but classic thesis, antithesis, synthesis frameworks to bring about problem, reaction, solution scenarios. And so in a two-phase Fabianistic revolution. And so in Cyvilan, we're going to cover how revolutions were used to bring about certain eras in history, and so how revolutions are going to play an important role in the end. Like you would hear the Fourth Industrial Revolution, that's to bring about the end of the middle class, right? Because the first or the Industrial Revolution gave rise to the middle class. The Fourth Industrial Revolution will be the death knell to the middle class, bringing us back under the feudalistic system. And so when we ask the question, it's the New World Order, but whose New World Order is it? That's going to be the key component, and that's going to where there's imagine like a ladder, or you have both legs of the ladder. You have the rungs in between. There's a lot of connectivity or a lot of connection points in between both of those narratives. Even if you trace them separately, you're going to end up getting to the same result. Yeah. I mean, you said ladder, but the image that came to mind was like the DNA helix thing, right? So I don't know why that's the first thing popped in my head. It's interesting that you would say that, because if we follow that type of idea, right? So that's Genesis 6:4, right? The sons of God and the daughters of men, they bore offspring unto them, which produced the great warriors of old, the men of renown known as the Nephilim, that were the giant clans, and the giant clans get wiped out partially in the flood, and then after the flood, they're killed under the conquest of Moses and Joshua, right, known as the conquest narratives. And so finally, the last one's kind of conquered by David, the second king of Israel, who kills Goliath, right? And so, and then you get Goliath's brothers finally slain, and that's kind of like the end of the giant clans. And with that whole idea, when Matthew 24, where Jesus says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be when the Son of Man returns." Well, what was going on in those days of Noah? You had this hybridization that was taking place, the sons of God and the daughters of man, their offspring. And that's a whole bunch of Enochian stuff. That's that's known as the first book of Enoch. So you have Enoch 1 through, I think, 36, where it gives that entire backstory of Genesis 6:4. And so this idea of like hybridization and transhumanism, and now today you have mankind trying to merge themselves with technology to live longer. I mean, we watched the I think he's the advisor to Klaus Schwab, right? The whole human hacking and all that idea of... so, which is, I think it would be under God, King, Father, Friend too, because so God creates you, and you are your own sovereign being and stuff like that. But the talks they're having right now is that they will be able to download you somewhere too and have the rights to you, pretty much, right? Or at least to the data that is you. Right. So do you own the data that is you? Right. So, if I have a copy of it, is it my copy or is it yours, right? So do you have any intellectual property rights to it? That type of idea, right? So, and your memories, who do you own your memories, or so you get this whole idea of like privacy was a big deal when the internet first popped on the scene. So you had all these intellectual property right problems that pop up, and so people, when you look at this stuff, you go, hey, if we're going to merge with technology, who owns the technology? You have all this mRNA stuff that changes, the genome, and you have GMO foods, GMO trees.
Because the idea is you can't patent something that's in nature, right? Or that is something that's so weaponized or whatever. But if they somehow get to do that, then they can patent it, and then they can be the only ones.
As they say, you'll own nothing and be happy. So, because it's not a question of them asking you, do you want to give up your rights?
Yeah, this is a statement. This is just saying what's to come. Yeah. Yes. Before they used to foreshadow them through movies and stuff like that. Now they're like, no need. Listen, this is what's going to happen.
This is what we're going to do. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy, right? So, before, let's say this, this aspect of what we want to cover here. So you get like the God, King, Father, Friend concept in this podcast. We want to bring about like the worldview in which we see the world, right? So Cyvilan is kind of like how we look at the political stuff from a secular perspective. God, King, Father, Friend is kind of how we see things through the biblical perspective, and in the background, like when we think about it, it's one thing going forward, right? So, but the audience may or may not like those two things blended, so we just created separate podcasts to have both threads going forward. So, but it really describes as what's known as like the tale between two kingdoms, right? The kingdom of light versus the kingdom of darkness, or the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of evil, things like that. So, in other words, you get this idea of like, yes, you'll have like this new world order, and yes, it will culminate in some type of like a feudalistic society where everything's controlled by either AI algorithms and some type of like machinery or robots. And yes, you can kind of merge yourself with technology, and yes, you can do all these things. But what is the underlying ideology? And that can kind of trace us back to like there's a couple ideas that kind of hook into history. And so in the God, King, Father, Friend aspect, it would be this idea of like, you shall be as gods, right? So that was the original lie that was told to Eve by the serpent. And so you look at this idea of like what was the idea that was being conveyed? Yeah. That is it really that you're going to become like an Elohim? And by the way, Elohim,
that was the question that I asked, right? So when they mean like gods in plural, they don't talk about the Most High. They talk about like them, the Elohim, right? Which is what's the meaning of the Elohim?
Yeah, so an Elohim is a Hebrew term that simply means a spirit being that lives in the spirit world. And so when you look at the usage of it in Genesis, you say, you shall be as gods. Well, clearly, if you're taking a modern view of that text, you say, wait a minute, this is a serpent talking. Yeah. So it's a talking snake?
Yeah, of course.
And the talking snake somehow knows what being like God is like. Yeah. And so without unpacking all that stuff, the story is kind of like, it's kind of hidden to you, or you're kind of like deliberately cut off, simply because you're not in the audience of a first or an ancient Israelite. Yeah. And so to get to what that stuff meant takes a little bit of unpacking. And so when you look at, the serpentine language, right? So that's Genesis 3. Now the serpent was more crafty than all the living creatures the Lord God had made. And the serpent said to the woman, and so now you're going to get this conversation, and Eve is not freaked out that, hey, this is the snake. The talking snake. Yeah. And so later on you get, apologists, people that try to make sense of that story from a 21st century view. Like, okay, before snakes used to have legs, and now they don't. Right?
When they get their curse, then now they have to, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so all of that stuff is highly problematic, right? And rightfully so, because like we said before, if you've put a lot of time and effort and a lot of spilled ink over expounding that view, then you're on the hook to defend it, and defending that in light of kind of like what we know now about what the text is actually saying had nothing to do with like snakes having legs before, that type of idea. So what you get is this divine being motif. If it's serpent, it's a triple entendre. You go, well, why? Well, the term that's used is hanakash, right? So, well, what is that, right? So if I translate it as a noun, it's a serpent. If I translate it as an adjective, what does it mean? Oh, it's shining or brazen. It's brazen in appearance. It's luminous. It's shining, right? And if I translate
something that illuminates,
if I translate it as a verb, oh, that's a diviner, somebody who imparts divine knowledge. Oh, what does that mean? Oh, you're going to take some information from the divine world, the spirit world, and you're going to impart it unauthorized to somebody else.
And we already know they are beings, right? So men are being created in our own image, right? After our own likeness and all that stuff too. So
that's Genesis 1:26.
So we know that the beings exist, right? And then later on we see that those beings are being placed over the nations and all that stuff too, right? So that it kind of follows the idea perfectly, you know? Somehow when it comes to that, they're like, oh, see, there you go, the one God and that's it, you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, we'll talk about, you know, there's different ideas like monotheism, monotheism, henotheism, polytheism. So polytheism, there's a whole bunch of gods. Henotheism, there's a whole bunch of gods and one supreme God. Monotheism, there's only one God. And so you get this idea of like, people want to say that, Christianity or Judaism is monotheistic. You know, well, it's true. But it depends on how you use the terms, right? So imagine if you say like, because there's a whole bunch of statements that are about Yahweh, and so Yahweh is an Elohim, but no other Elohim is Yahweh. Elohim just means a spirit being that lives in the spirit world. So if you're to ask Moses, hey Moses, are there other Elohim? He's like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. There's a whole entire spirit world filled with spirit beings, right? And you go, all of those are kind of like the same, right? He goes, no, because there's only one Yahweh. There's only one being that's A, tripersonal, B, who's infinite, who's omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, all those omni phrases. He's the only one that's eternal, and he's the only one attributed with the creation of the heavens and the earth and the seas and all that in them are. And so now, as you go through this stuff, kind of like unpacking the terms, unpacking. So the idea is like in Psalm 82, you get like God takes his stand. Right? It's Elohim takes his stand amongst the gods. The other Elohim, he renders judgment. Right. So because the pronoun is he. Right. So the first Elohim, he's the one that's delivering judgment to the other Elohim. So and you can't be in the midst of one. So there's this one Elohim that's judging these other Elohim that now for some thing that they're doing wrong, they're kind of like misadministering the nations, right? And so at the end of that passage it says, "Rise up, Yahweh, take back the nations," and it's a reference to Deuteronomy 32, right? So when the Most High divided the nations, when did he do that? He divided them at the Tower of Babel, right? So he set their borders and boundaries according to the number of the sons of God. So you go, okay, from that aspect, you have the Most High guy, it's not a brain teaser, that's Yahweh. And what did he do? He, at the Tower of Babel, divides the nations, and he places the sons of God over the nations. And, well, who are these characters, right? So this is kind of like jumping into the kind of the stuff that we have kind of prepared to talk about. And so to kind of like rewind before we get there, because there's a whole lot of backstory that needs to be told before we get into that aspect of it, because people are going to freak out when they hear, like, you know, and Heiser's already done like an excellent job of going through all this stuff, him and John Walton as well. And so when you go through these phrases, you're going to get this idea of the divine council. You're going to get the idea of the sons of God that are placed over the nations. You get like this divine assembly aspect, and these guys are kind of partnering with Yahweh to make decisions over the affairs of men. These guys are carrying out judgment so that that men may know that this is the Most High that governs the affairs of men. You get all this language that's used, and kind of that stuff has been off the table, like in Christianity, I would say, for a good portion of the timeline. These things have kind of like been under the radar. Maybe
later on we'll get into why that is too, right?
Yeah, and so I mean, I think there's a real
good reason. Which when was it? In 1999 when the everything was signed to. So now the unity in the whole church aspect of it too.
Yeah. Right? So even way before that. So I would say way before that. So you would have right now you have like the joint declaration is probably what you're referring to, but way before that you had this idea of like. This stuff is kind of like, especially when you talk about like the spirit world, like who's there, what do these guys do, who are they? And for I would say for most people, it's just God, angels, demon, and Satan.
Yeah,
that's about it, right? That's the end of the cast.
Angels have wings, demons have tails and horns, and
none of which is true. Yeah. All of it's false, right? So and that's the Hollywood version of all of this. It's like a caricature.
It's interesting you said Hollywood too. So. looking through like the civilian point of view, you said there's like two aspects, right? So the occult religions and stuff like that. Seems like now some of that aspect of like, all these people like worship some kind of they have these secret rituals and all that stuff. It's kind of in the mainstream now, right? With the help of like Alex Jones and all that stuff too. Now some people getting caught with all these like child molesters, islands and everything and stuff like that too. Some emails being leaked about, sacrificing to Moloch and all that stuff, right? That's coming into the mainstream too. But we don't know if it's also by design or not. Are you trying to muddy the waters? What's happening
I would
there?
say that's a lot of both, right?
Yeah.
So I don't think they have to be as careful anymore. Like, why? Right?
Yeah,
so
that's a good point.
It's kind
too.
of like now you have more references by more people about the New World Order, right? So you had just Biden recently saying we have to get to the New World Order, right?
Yeah.
So. And then,
the whole talks in Australia and all that stuff too. I forgot the lady. What is she? The New World Order.
That's Jocelyn. I keep
forgetting
the
But the idea is we hear it everywhere, right? So we're never going back to the old way of life. There's a New World Order. After these things are gonna change and all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
We also heard Biden talk about we're looking into autocracy instead of the democracy because it's kind of hard to make decisions when it comes to emergencies and all that stuff too.
Yeah. So, I mean, all of that stuff is going to come full circle. There's going to continue to be this this ramping up, and when you look at kind of like the United Nations taking more of a prominent role in the media and in debunking websites that are like standard guys that do all the they do all the fact checking and stuff like that. So you get all of this like, there's when you look at the United Nations, there's nothing to see here, right? So and these guys are just peacekeeping or just a peacekeeping organization is trying to keep us from going to all these different wars, even though we have more wars under the United Nations than anybody else. But what they're not going to tell you is that this is the infrastructure for this global governance thing. So, and everything is in steps, right? So they're going to do, they already had the World Federation of Nations. There's like a Humanist Manifesto 1 and 2 for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then there's all these organizations that parry or replace the organizations within a nation state, right? And so on Civilian, we'll talk about how they're going to make this progress, and it's a very deliberate, well thought out process under Agenda 21, then Agenda 2030, Agenda 2050, and you get this progression as you mentioned before. Kind of things kind of come back to COVID. It's like, so as COVID has got everybody used to like all this lockdown and stuff, and all these new laws that get passed, and then this track and trace stuff kind of hits like in full force, and that's going to shift into the as CNN, the correspondent said, the next thing for us is climate change, right? So climate lockdowns. You have this person that was diagnosed with climate change, and so that's going to dovetail into.
That was in Canada, right?
Yeah, that's going to dovetail into Sunday law.
Yeah,
and so that historically known as the blue laws here within the United States. And so all of this, these are just like steps moving forward. They're inching their way, and that approach is a Fabianistic tactic, right? By peace and politics, stealth and secrecy. Everything is kind of like if you're not paying attention, if you're not keeping your finger on the pulse, things just seem like they're happening.
Yeah.
Like, when did this take place? But you can trace the history of it, right? It's kind of like we sent a friend of ours that list of movies, right? So like, here's 50 movies that primed you to think about
starting like in the early 90s. I'm sure
they have every single detail that you find in the whole COVID narrative, right? So, and it's just that it's just the narrative, and so now you have the loss of taste and smell in these movies. You have all the same things that
people masking up and all that stuff.
Yeah. So we can kind of go through some of the stuff that we have prepared, right? So we can say, for those that are kind of watching, we have some notes that we can kind of go through. We'll talk through and kind of explain each like a bullet point, right? So. And so we look at the worldview that we see things through. So the secular idea of the New World Order is the Cyvilan Podcast, right? So we see definitely a New World Order that's taking place there. On the flip side, on the God, King, Father, Friend side, that New World Order is the Antichrist system that's being set up right before our very eyes. And so, again, the Antichrist isn't just going to pop up on the scene and everybody go, yeah, you're the Antichrist. Let's all like pay homage to you. That's not
you're the old Antichrist I've been hearing about.
Man, we've been hearing about this guy for so long. Finally, you're here. Now we can. Will you please make one world government, one world currency?
Hurry up already, right?
And so you get this idea of like the description of two kingdoms, right? So the kingdom of God or the kingdom of Yahweh versus the kingdom of darkness. And so these ideas are kind of like major themes that run throughout the Old and the New Testament, which is why they're important, why we kind of want to focus on them here. And so, in other words, if the Antichrist characters to show up and rule in the end times, we would expect to see that kingdom being built, kind of like, and the example that we use is kind of like, if you've seen Star Wars, the half-built Death Star, right? So,
the idea is still functional, but it's not yet
it's not yet complete, right? So, and if that's the case, then, God, King, Father, Friend details the New World Order from the biblical perspective. And so there's a lot of things that need to be put in place if, like it says in Revelation, this person is going to cause everyone, small and great, rich and poor, male and female, free and bond, everybody to receive this mark on their right hand or forehead. And you can't buy, sell, or trade unless you have the mark or the number of the beast. And then the number is given 666, right? So that has its own history. Beast language, beast terminology has its own history. It's definitely Old Testament. Beast is very important concepts to understand, because if you're reading it, you think it's like a dragon that's popping up, because the terms like dragon are used, and not knowing what those refer to.
Luckily, Hollywood already reimagined dragons for us, so we know what they look like.
They did, right? And so what we end up.
But it's interesting, right? So having all that, they put all those ideas in your head. So and then kind of in that fictional way. So even if you're new and you want to go back to like, okay, I'm going to read some comes up, you're in a hardship. Usually that's when people turn to God, right? Maybe there is God. You start reading and you're like, okay, no, this is like, let's put that away.
Yeah, because it puts it in like fairy tale or fantasy land. And especially in hard times, the last thing you want is a fantasy.
Exactly.
Right? And so, which is a good segue into a psychological operation, right? So we mentioned in the Cyvilan Podcast, they don't call them PSYOPs anymore. They call them Military Information Support Operations, or MISOs. And so for our next piece here, so in view of this spiritual MISO or spiritual PSYOP, you have this idea that the God of Israel is the true God. And so, well, then, if that's the case, then how did the other nations get all of their gods? And so now you're getting into how the Old Testament is framed. And so all the other gods and goddesses are nothing other than like the fallen sons of God that are placed over the nations at the Tower of Babel. And most people are not familiar with that concept by itself. And so you go, what do you mean the sons of God? I thought Jesus is the son of God. I mean, how are there multiple sons of God unless you're Mormon, right? So, you get this idea like you have to understand how the spirit world is architected, and on that side there's rank, there's file, there's tier, there's a reason why we have this phrase "as above, so below," right? So because there is a hierarchy there, and so now in the Old Testament, they're referred to as the gods of the nations. And why are they the gods of the nations? So because there's something that specific happens when they take this leadership role, this administrative role over the nations that are assigned to them at Babel. And what do? They lead their populations in idolatry, basically in rebellion against Yahweh.
They want the people to worship them now,
right? And so So what they're supposed to do is be kind of like the way that a priestly role is defined. They're supposed to mediate knowledge and access of the true God. This is kind of going to get us on what Adam's role was in the garden, in sacred space, right? So, and all of this stuff is kind of coming up later. So we'll kind of keep it on task here because these would be like the spoiler alert. So. So there's this great war that's going on between the divine realm that spills over into the human realm, and now you're going to have beings that are also created in the image of God, human beings, we're sandwiched in between this great war, right? And so And then this is how your Old Testament is framed. It's Yahweh and his people versus the sons of God who are known as the gods of the nations and their people. What distinguishes the people of Yahweh? Those, as it says in 1 John, if you say that you know him and you do not keep his commandments, then you are a liar and the truth is not in you. So the people that follow Yahweh, who are those people? If you want to identify it with being in the kingdom of light, on Yahweh's team, then you must be, to say that you know him, you must be keeping his commands, should you not, right? Otherwise, you make the text out to be a lie, right? So now as we go through, we'll see that we're kind of the ones that are sandwiched between this great war, and really it's just about choosing sides. And so where does your loyalty or your allegiance lie?
Yeah. So there you see the importance of the idea that you will be like gods, right? To give you that idea, because then you're not you don't have any authority and you're not answering to anybody. Why would you do, for, let's say, oh, I'm a good person, I won't kill, I won't do all this stuff, but there's also other stuff, right? You can't lust on, well, you're like, okay, I'm not doing anything bad if I'm lusting, so and then you decide for yourself that from now on, I'm still a good person, I won't kill anybody, I won't rob anybody, I won't steal, I won't...
So what you'll have is a do no harm policy.
Exactly.
And that becomes, that's a law unto yourself. Now here you are in the created world, making laws that govern you, a creature. You're making yourself a sovereign unto yourself. Where did you get this sovereignty from as a contingent created being? You don't have it, right? So it's an assumed authority that you don't have.
So nowadays, let's say the serpent would be telling you, you're not really doing anything bad.
Right.
It's not bad. You're not harming anybody. Right. The generation that's being trained right now, that would be a very good sell for them, right? Like under the do no harm, like, okay, as long as it has nothing to do with me, probably, right? They'll start somewhere there.
That's all, relativism, right? So, morality is relative to culture, upbringing, and, whatever ideology your ancestors had. Yeah. And what's, as Jordan Maxwell would say, like the law of the land. Like, so when you land on a land, like, hey, well, what's the law here, right? How am I supposed to act? What's acceptable? What's unacceptable, right? So, and in those things, you go, well, that's contrary to something that's immutable like the law of God, right? So and the law of God is to be the whole idea of it is that you think based on it being like this quasi-sovereign being that you esteem yourself to be, by this small subset of laws, it's pretty clear. It's kind of like the mirror. When you look in there, you straighten up your character when you look into this law, because this law, it's not going to change. B, it reflects the character and nature of God. And so if you're claiming that you're good without meeting this standard, then you know that you're not really good, right? So you just have a profession of it, real substance. And so that stuff dovetails with like the next point right here, because you get this idea, like the enemies of Yahweh, the kingdom of darkness, and those that identify with the fallen sons of God, which would be the gods of the nations, which would be every religion in the world. So that would come. You think about the weight of what that means. Like, wait a minute. So you're saying that there's only one true God, meaning, and that term is a little bit elusive, right? So what you're saying is really that Yahweh is the creator of the heavens and the earth, and it's His order that we're to maintain, and that these guys that He placed over the nations as a judgment after the flood at the Tower of Babel. And He's just going to deal with this nation of Israel. And that Israel is supposed to reflect His nature and character to these nations and then produce this Messiah thing. And this Messiah, that's supposed to be this divine man. He's 100% God, 100% man. This guy is supposed to undo all of this. Undo all of this what? So you have, what we'll kind of characterize here is like all of these rebellions that take place. So you have the Nakash, the serpent that's in the garden. You have the fall of Adam, male and female version, right? So, which end up being these two priests, right? So Adam and Eve. We know that Adam is not his name and Eve is not her name, because Hebrew 2nd millennium BC, and they're recounting a story that took place long before that time. And so whatever their actual names were, they're telling the story to recount how Yahweh dealt with mankind in the beginning. And so as mankind is driven from the presence of Yahweh, you get this idea of like, that we already got 2 rebellions down and we got some more rebellions to go. So now you get the transgression of the heavens and the earth, the sons of God and the daughters of man. They bore offspring unto them. That backstory is in the book of 1 Enoch 1-36. And then this is the precursor for the flood. And so Noah is preserved, him and his family, so 8 people in total. And so you get the questions of, is the flood global or is it local? Because it says, the Nephilim characters, they're going to come back on the scene with these giants. And these giants are then going to be killed off in subsequent wars under Moses and then Joshua. And so where were they this entire time to resurface? And or was there a second incursion? Did the sons of God take the daughters of men a second time? We don't have that record, but there's speculation around it, right? So, and so now this is all, you get this huge backstory of rebellions that lead up to kind of like the last straw where, Yahweh's like, okay, I'm going to, he kind of started out with the Edenic mandate, be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth and subdue it. Take my good rule over the world. And so the man and woman were supposed to partner together to go create basically many Edens throughout the world as they create offspring. Their offspring are taught, they mediate knowledge and access of the true God to their offspring and so forth. Right? That was the idea. And so, but
that was the same thing, but the school does it for you. Right?
So now the state wants to do that actually, because the state has somebody else that and their own day. That
like we know you're too busy.
And so as we go through this thing, right? So you get, the enemies of Yahweh are attempted to completely remove his rule, any trace of anything that he called good in those 7 days of creation. Notice it's the 7 days of creation, right? So, and that's kind of going to get on the idea of like, what is actually going on in this Genesis 1 account? What is happening here? And you're going to get a whole bunch of these like major themes that are going to get birthed into the text. And so, but before we get to there, there's some backstory that still needs to be fulfilled. Right? So as we go through, so what are these guys doing? They're turning the hearts of their populations against Yahweh and to them, to make them more and more loyal to these fallen sons of God. Right? And so, and the reason why they would continue to do this is because in Psalm 82, this is, when you mentioned Michael Heiser earlier, this is where these guys are actually judged, right? So Yahweh takes his stand, or it says Elohim takes his stand in the divine council. Amongst the gods, he renders judgment. How long will you unrighteously rule the nations? And so they'll have called you the sons of God. That's a rank and file term. That's the highest rank in the spirit world. Though you will die like men and fall like any prince, right? So there's a death sentence. And so you get this idea.
So is it kind of like he ascribes them a sin or something, right? So the people that have seen the sin is the root of the evil and all that stuff, and you die type of thing, right?
Right. So what's happening is now, so everything is contingent upon Yahweh is the only one that has existence, right? And so he imparts, this is going to kind of get us on the name theology, right? So and so when we go through his name later, he is existence, and he imparts it to his creation. These beings are created beings. As long as they are with him, just they have life, just like we were in Eden. As long as we're with Yahweh, he is the source of life. He is the source of existence. And so if we're there, then we're alive. If we're cut off from him, we are doomed to die. And so that relationship was mediated through the tree of life, right? And so, and this is what the motif of a tree, the tree of life, is going to follow throughout the text. And it's going to pop up again in Revelation, where there's a new heavens and a new earth. And so these are major themes with major hooks. And so before we get there,
before we jump the goat again,
there's more groundwork to be right. So as we go through here, these guys are the reason why they're still hostile is because they have now this death sentence. They're now doomed to die. And so, they're going to take basically as many of the earthly imagers as they can with them. So they have already done this thing of like, Yahweh's not the Most High. I'm the Most High now, right? And so now, as their populations follow them under whatever banner of whatever religion it is, based on whatever philosophy or ideology, you get this idea of like, their ship is sinking. They're going to go down with it, and they're going to take as many of us, so to speak, with them, right? And so as you go through that type of story, you get this idea of like they're kind of like paying homage to like the original divine rebel, the Hanakash, the serpent guy that's in the beginning, who seems to be the first one to rebel against Yahweh, right? And so with the deception of Eve, and so as you go through that story, right, you get this idea of like what we'll cover later is like you get chaos, non-order, order, and disorder. These are major themes that are going to pop up as well. So you start off with this, with non-existence, and so when you look at like Genesis 1, the Genesis 1 story is not telling you the story from non-existence to existence. It's telling you a story like basically when you guys it's ready for you guys to show up in this story, then I'm gonna start kind of like right there. But there's things that are already assumed to be there in the text, which is why the text is laid out like it is. But before we get there,
so kind of like let's say you're an actor in a theater. Somebody the set is already there. You're gonna come and you have a role, right? So you're given a role, and then you're gonna go and perform that role.
Exactly.
Right?
So imagine like if you wanted to shoot a film, but you had to create a universe first. And then, I mean, it's not telling that story. So it's already assuming that the set is there, and now the actors are going to jump on stage and they're going to play out their roles. And so you got over the centuries, you have new phases of the psychological warfare have been playing themselves out. So and what we did was kind of go through and we grabbed a couple of phrases that we knew people would kind of know, and we put them in an order that kind of best represent the era of the psyops, right? So if you break it down into different time pieces, and so you get the first one is ye shall be as gods. That comes straight from Genesis, right? So the second one is do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. People will recognize that from Aleister Crowley, right? So the self-proclaimed wickedest man alive, or the wickedest man on the earth. And so the third one would be as above, so below. The fourth one would be solve coagula, dissolve and rebuild. The fifth one would be order abkau, order out of chaos. The next one would be phoenix arising out of the ashes. The phoenix arises. Right? Then the next one would be novus ordo secularum, the new order of the ages. The next one would be annuit coeptus. He favors our endeavors. The next one would be e pluribus unim. Out of many, we're going to create this one. And so when you go back over this, so if we were to repeat the same thing and provide like a small explanation for each one of these. So ye shall be as gods, become supernatural, right? Yeah. So because mankind was created non-super, so they were spirit beings, but they were embodied, right? So now you have an Elohim, a disembodied spirit being, and that story takes place there. It doesn't say that they're in the garden. Only the garden was ordered as sacred space. Only the garden was this complete paradise, this place of perfection. So wherever this encounter takes place with Eve and the serpent, it wasn't in the garden, right? And so...
but I like how, they try to mend to favor that thing that's better, but they themselves want to get bodies, right?
So this is
seems like they know that this is the better one.
So that actually is another theme that plays a prominent role, because you get this idea of glorification. So in the Christian life, you get this idea. First, you're justified before God, right, by what Jesus has done, right? He's the unblemished Lamb on whom the sins of the world were placed. He redeems us. His death pays the penalty for our sin. His life is the righteousness that we're wrapped in. His resurrection guarantees because he lives, we too shall live, but bought with a great price. We're ransomed and redeemed back to God. And so the sin and death problem is taken care of. And so you go, so what's the next phase of that? Well, sanctification. While you're still alive, you're made, you're transformed in the image of Jesus, who is the image. He is the perfect image of God. He is the express image of God, as it says in the New Testament. So, and then what's the final stage of that? Well, it's glorification, right? So we reign and rule with him forever. And so, but wait a minute, it looks like Eve, she goes, well, I like what you're saying here, serpent guy, but and I want it now. So we have, as it says, eyes have not seen, nor ears heard, nor has it entered the hearts of men, the things which God has prepared for those who love him. Right. So this whole idea of like a taking of the apple, it gets in this idea of like you assume sovereignty, autonomy, wisdom. you assume all these things unto yourself. You become a God unto yourself, and using the term God in that sense means like you're assuming the role or the authority of Yahweh, right? So because he is the source of life, he is the source of existence, he's the source of wisdom. When you try to live in his created world but apart from him, then you're doomed to die. So the whole idea of trying to assume these things for yourself and kind of circumventing the things that he has planned for, this is where the problems come in. This is where it says sin is lurking, is creeping at the door, is going to devour you, right? So, or it says about Satan, he's like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. And so, but as we go back over these, ye shall be as gods, right? That's the first thing, right? So, and so this idea of becoming gods, becoming an Elohim, a spirit being that lives in the spirit world. And so you go, okay, what's so bad about that? Well, like and this kind of gets us into Genesis 6:4, because what they do there, the sons of God and the daughters of man, is called the transgression of the heavens and the earth. The order that Yahweh put in the beginning, that order needs to be maintained, and only he has the right, the authority to authorize any type of change to it, right? So if you have these unnatural blendings, it's interesting because you get these the demons later on are going to be called unclean spirits, and people go, wait a minute, unclean, or like they're dirty?
Yeah.
So but no, so
with cosmic dirt. Yeah.
So you get this idea of like unnatural or unauthorized mixtures. This is that's lurking behind that term, right? So these are mixtures that were never meant to be, as the book of Enoch says, when these giants die, and these giants give us the demons on the timeline, because they're disembodied spirits and they seek re-embodiment. And so they're called bastard spirits. They're called unclean spirits because they were never intended to exist. And Enoch says there's found no place in heaven, there's no place in the underworld. And so what do? They seek re-embodiment. And so the next piece of this, do as you will shall be the whole of the law. So you assume authority to determine right and wrong for yourself, as though that's something that we can actually do, right? So, and this is why it's so funny that when you hear like all the moral relativists arguments, right? So they all have certain weaknesses to them, because they're going to, at the end of the day, they're going to assume some authority, and their authority is going to be themselves, right? So, it always begs the question of why should we care about your specific definition of it, right? And so, or better yet, why would we follow it, right? And there's no real good answer to that, right? So because we're all finite, we're all limited, and I don't have authority over you, you don't have authority over me. So we create this artificial thing and give it its power, kind of like you would give the power to the...
I mean, most of them, they just start stealing from, like the stuff that they like from when it comes to like Christianity and everything, right? So you see like this... when the standard of some kind of morality all of a sudden is like, where are you getting that from? I know where you're getting it from.
So I mean, there's this like people would say, and it's a right criticism. People would say like, you wouldn't need the Ten Commandments to know right from wrong, right? You would know not to kill your brother before you ever read the Ten Commandments, right? So the question is, well, where does that come from, right? So it's codified in the Ten Commandments, is the idea. Like so in Romans you get this idea that God has written it on the hearts of men, and so that people that don't have the written law, they're without excuse, and their conscience bears witness, right? So you go, well, where does that stuff originate? And so morality obviously wouldn't originate with the state, even though the state tries to legislate morality in certain senses, right? So but that gets us to the third piece. The third piece is as above, so below. And so that ties in, well, if the law of God, if these 10 commandments that he has given us, if those actually reflect his nature and his character, as if he himself were to live on the timeline, then now these things take on new weight, because you have the author of the heavens and the earth and the seas and all that in them are. You have that guy demonstrating how one should behave as a creature in a created world. One who has all the authority, who can change the rules of the game at any time, but doesn't. And this will get on the nature of God. Like, God is immutable, he's unchangeable, and his ways won't change, right? So but as above, so below, we recreate the hierarchy that we see in the heavenly realms. We recreate that down here, but we take Yahweh off the throne and we put ourselves there, right? So And that leads to the next one, solve coagula, right? So we need to dissolve and then bring together. Well, what does that mean? Well, we're going to break away from his rule, and we're going to build a rule unto ourselves. And so it's obviously none of these phrases were ever really intended to fit kind of together like this. Like nobody sat down like, let's fit these together like this. But it's obvious that they represent kind of like the sign of the times in each of these different epochs of time. And so the next one would be order Occult, right? So order out of chaos. That's well known in like Masonic circles, right? So they're gonna create the chaos, and then out of that chaos, they're gonna provide the order, and everybody's gonna look to them as a hero. And so out of the chaos of living in rebellion against Yahweh as creatures in a created world, now you're going to get this idea of like, well, that's chaotic. And so once we break away, once we've solved coagula, now we can do the next phase.
Yeah, so both of those can be like in one too, right? Like all these revolutions and stuff that we talk about kind of in Cyvilan and stuff like that too. You have the solve coagula, which would be like, you're gonna do something, you're gonna tear something down and build it better, and then while doing that, you're gonna create a chaos, and out of that whatever is gonna come out would be
the order that you originally designed. Right? So, and you're going to do that using thesis, antithesis, synthesis frameworks to provide problem reaction.
Yeah. So, like, if we take it, right? So, hey, stay away from your parents, family, and all that stuff. You might kill them. But then also, hey, let's get together to build this thing and go do your part. You know, hey, we have to go and get the...
This deliberate confusing and conflation of terms, right? So God is not the God of confusion. Yeah. And so when you get two separate avenues of thought that seem to be saying the same thing, like, hey, let's stick together by staying separate, right? So it's like things that kind of like that it's creating like that's funny. A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. That's from the biblical text, but out of the chaos that's that brings about this order that they want to kind of refashion the world in their own brand, so to speak. You get this idea of the phoenix arising, right? So the ashes that are created from this solve coagula and this chaos, you get this idea of that they will rise victorious from the ashes, right? And so once they do that, now they're going to do what? Create a novus ordo secularum, a new order of the ages, right? So in which Yahweh is no longer the supreme being, somebody else, because they're doing this in effigy to somebody else. They have a inspiration for this entire project that they're undertaking. And so the next piece is e pluribus unum. Out of many, they're going to make one. And so now we see that, if it's the Cyvilan Podcast, that's clearly a reference to the United Nations, right? So because it's in the United Nations that all the nations of the world are represented, I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. Yeah. And the idea at the Tower of Babel was the world was one, and they had one language. And so God confuses the language. He divides the borders and boundaries of the people. He numbers them according to the number of the sons of God. We get the table of nations in Genesis, so there's 70 nations, so presumably 70 sons are placed over those nations, and they have specific borders and boundaries and certain people groups. And so in ancient times, you were kind of identified by which language you spoke and which God you served, right? So going forward on the timeline, it's no different. We just got more nuanced over time. And so the next piece of that is like it's kind of like just a noet coeptus, or it's this idea of he, who's he. So you'll hear that it's God that favors our endeavors, right? But who's the God that they're referring to? And so clearly it's not the God of Israel. It's not Yahweh, right? So who is it? So it's the original divine rebel, the one that kind of got for mankind this whole ball rolling in rebellion against Yahweh. And so as we go through, you get 2 Corinthians 4:4 will kind of like tell us exactly who. So he says, 2 Corinthians 4:4 says, but even if the gospel is veiled, it's veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded. And so who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, that's going to be an important thing as we go through later, what exactly that is, should shine in them or shine upon them. And so you get this idea that there's this war that rages between the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of darkness. And so it's interesting because, this light and dark motif is like a major theme throughout the Old and New Testament, and in the ancient or the occult world as well. And so light is darkness visible, according to the Masonic statements. And so with the Cyvilan landscape we cover, and this next piece is on the back of the Cyvilan hoodie, right? So we say, to implement the New World Order in the secular sense, the kingdom of the Antichrist in the biblical sense, they have a tactic, right? So this tactic, that they're using is thesis, antithesis, synthesis frameworks to provide problem, reaction, solution scenarios in a two-phase Fabianistic revolution, one violent, one non-violent, to implement the social justice of the common good by stealth and secrecy through peace and politics by the 4 stages of ideological subversion: demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and normalization. And they're using pincer military tactics, pinching the majority through politicians and protesters to get complete government control over all private property, the means of production, and all avenues of trade, providing this oligarchical collectivism and the Rhodes Milner Roundtable groups global governance through what? Through the World Federation of Nations, through the United Nations, to bring about a new world order, a global government, a one world religion under the Pax Romana. And so there are a lot of hits in there where we're kind of going with all this stuff. Pax Romana, that's a play on, this whole idea of today we have the Pax Americana, which is dying out, right? So it's a apoptosis, it's programmed death for for U.S. hegemony, or the U.S. Being a sole superpower in the world. And so you get this idea that, they've already announced the World Economic Forum.
It's the exit plan for America.
It's the exit strategy for America supremacy by 2030. And so with that, you get, that phrase that we just mentioned is on the back of our, it's called the blueprint that's on the back of our Cyvilan hoodie. And so, but that's the secular version of this history or this story. So this is exemplified in the biblical narrative in Revelation 13:16. And so we have a quote from Revelation 13. He calls us all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or their forehead. And no one may buy or sell except who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. For it's the number of man, which is, his number is 6, and 6. And so that number is a very important number that has very important occultic or secret knowledge type data associated with it. And so we should probably note that magic is a major part of Masonry, and it's a major part of like this whole occult movement, because you're going to get this idea that intertwined with that aspect is the ancient occult knowledge that was developed and passed down through the mystery religions to today. And so to see how all that plays out, we'll have to get some of the Masonic sources later, of which we have like, I don't even know how long it'll take us to get through all of that stuff. Yeah. So basically quote mining.
What I like is that, a lot of this stuff that now the magic would be looked at as entertainment, right? So even if you tell somebody like, hey, magic is a big part of that, you already can be dismissed. Oh, you mean the guy that can pull out a rabbit from the hat?
Yeah. Right, so all of that. So all of this stuff is kind of like, it has its roots. If you're following God, King, Father, Friend, it has its roots in the Watchers, the sons of God to take on the daughters of men. That aspect. Because in the Enochian story, it's the Watcher guys that teach mankind all of these sacred arts, right? And so, and then the occult guys would say like, hey, like in the biblical narrative, we preserved all of that stuff. So you're the stories that you're reading; those are allegories of like bigger stories, or for the adepts or those that are in the know, the initiated. We really know what those stories mean, and they're passing down the secret knowledge that's embedded. And so you get all these phrases by like Albert Pike, the talking about like the symbols of the adepts always become like the idols of the ignorant, right? So, and so they would say that, oh, you're following these type of narratives, and clearly you're ignorant. You don't know what any of these things mean. There's a whole esoteric knowledge that's built in there, and its purpose is to deceive you. Those who think that they know don't know, right? The whole idea.
The idea is that even the ones that are initiated, not all of them know. There's certain degrees that you have to get to, and then you'll be. Now you deserve this level of knowledge, or now we'll give you.
It's interesting you mentioned degrees, right? So 32 is the freezing point of water. A Mason that's of the 32nd degree, he's frozen until he's that comes the 33rd or active. And so getting to why things are broken down into degrees at all, right? So why is temperature in degrees? Why is these a lot of the stuff is like Masonic concepts that come down to us, right? So
see, that's the crazy part. So imagine you say that and like, oh, you mean because the water? We're not saying it. That's what they say.
Yeah. So that's a good catch, right? Because it wouldn't be me.
This is not Jeremy saying, oh, water freezes at 32. They have 33 degrees. Yeah. Oh, that's what it is. They frozen until they know.
That's a good catch, right? So in casual conversation, you just say stuff like that, like because
I know what you mean. You don't just come up with stuff and it's like, oh, probably they do this. Yeah.
So what would if we say stuff like that for that subject? Oh, here's where they say it, right? Yeah. So it's not me saying, it's Wilmhurst or something like that says it, right? So I would show that and like, oh, here's where they say that, right? So here's what they mean by these rites and by these rituals. Yeah. Here's what's known as the secret doctrine. Here's what a Master Mason really means. All of that stuff. Yeah. So getting into all that's way later on the on both the New World Order and the on the Cyvilan and the God King Father.
Especially Freemasonry, it's like relatively it's like they're brand new, pretty much.
So in this story, they'd be like, if you look at geologic time type of thing, right? So they would be extremely
their surface level, And
so, but they would Masonize history though. They would say, going all the way back, the builders of the Tower of Babel were Mason. That's what they're going to say. And so I have all those quotes too, right? So there's multiple that make that claim, right? And so like
Jeremy from God King Father Reframing Podcast says that the Bible Tower or the Tower of Babel was built by Masons.
So the good thing is like it feels good to be able to like say stuff like casual, like it's not me that's in. I hate the idea that like I would be the source of that. Right? So I would just be like a source for the reference, like that's found here or this idea is found there, right? So and then you're just kind of like you get the puzzle and you look at the front of the box and like, okay, this is the idea. So you pour the puzzle out and okay, this piece goes here, this piece, and eventually you get the entire picture together, right? So that's all I'm doing. So taking all these different pieces, like, hey, here's what Masonry says. Hey, here's what all of these other sources say. Right? Here's how we can know, like, from an official narrative of what we're told. Here's how we can know, like, this is probably not really real. This is probably what happened over here. And with more sources that are more early or earlier, more I guess sustainable sources. I guess I would say. And so continuing with our thinking here, so this whole kingdom of darkness versus kingdom of light thing is kind of continued with, people want to live in darkness is trying to live independently of Yahweh, who is the source of life. He's the source of wisdom. He would be the source of those moral ideas. And so because his nature is unchanging, it's immutable, then those characteristics would never change, right? None of those things would ever flip, and they wouldn't be relative to whatever circumstance, right? So, but you get this idea, if you're flipping all of this stuff, then it's do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. And so within do as thou wilt, well, as long as I don't hurt you or inflict suffering upon you or any other sentient type being, then it must be okay in some sense. And so you start getting these rational justifications, and then, as it would say in the biblical text, you're not to lean onto your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. It's interesting that the sons of God, a term that's used for them is watcher. That term is matzere in other language. The idea matzere, that these guys don't sleep, right? So they're ever watching. They don't miss anything. So you get this idea that the actions of mankind kind are being recorded in meticulous detail. And so, that's a phrase that is going to pop up later with Jesus. He goes, every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give an account thereof on the day of judgment. And then you get like the judgment language, like who's all involved in this judgment thing. So you're going to get like, later is like, obviously Yahweh, the God of Israel, is the head honcho. He's doing all the judging. And now you get this vice regent character, the second Yahweh, the second power, who in the Old Testament has the same titles as Yahweh. In the New Testament, he's the Son of God as the monogenes. He's the one of a kind Son of God. He's the one in whom Yahweh's name indwells. Right, so you're gonna get as we go through.
I mean, there's a lot of stuff, right? We had conversations about like what even judgment is and all that stuff. It's not like looking at somebody who's like, look at you, right? That's not what you're gonna. That's not what's gonna happen.
That's making an assessment. How you treat them is the judgment.
Right. And then that was the. I was gonna say everybody with the tattoo that says only God can judge me. You're right. Congratulations. That was probably a bad idea to put it there, but that's all right. Yeah, you're right.
So I mean, we can kind of wrap this one up, and then we'll pick it up on.
Yeah, I think we're already over an hour. Yeah. In order not to make this super long and stuff like that. Yeah.
All right.
So with that being said, thank you for watching.
Yeah, thank you.
Do all that good stuff when it comes to like, subscribe, and everything. I think now you have to say ring a bell too. I don't know what that means, but these YouTubers are saying it.
That's what the cool kids are saying these days.
I mean, apparently on YouTube now the subscription doesn't really matter based on like the algorithms. They'll still show you the video you want, but if you ring the bell, then it will tell them that no, I want to be notified when the video is posted. So if you want to be notified when the video is posted, ring that bell. You can support a podcast by going to patreon.com/iconic, the Iconic Podcast, or you can go to the iconiclabel.com and you can purchase the hoodies. Yeah. Or I mean, you don't have to get this one, but
Cyvilan Iconic Podcast or this would be God King Father Friend.
Good gauge too to see like like where people are coming from. So like if these ones are being sold more, kind of will be the idea too. So if you want to support this podcast separately, because at some point we will probably separate them too, right?
Yeah, they need to be. So maybe even like a separate channel. Yeah, perhaps. We have to see how it's going to go.
Yeah. And then, are we missing anything else?
I think that's it for now.
Yeah, all the links and all stuff like that, I will leave them below. You can go hoo.b/iconic. Yeah. All the links to everything else. In other platforms and everything too.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for watching. I appreciate it.
Bye.